welcome everyone to today's webcast, our fifth installment of creating knowledge workers for the greener product marketplace. And today's installment is entitled Classroom, Campus, and Cloud. The reason that we're going with that title is because today we've got representatives from schools using Sustainable Minds in different geographies, both virtual and physical, and we're always amazed to hear the stories of how Sustainable Minds is being used and all the creativity that the different faculty are bringing to bear. As we move into kind of the setup for this webcast, the series is called Creating Knowledge Workers for the Greener Product Marketplace because at the end of the day, it's all about jobs in the economy. And schools, like any other business, have to attract customers, but in this case they're students. Schools teaching environmental sustainability will attract the right kind of students to meet industry demand, and when that happens, manufacturers will recruit those students out of those schools because they need actionable, knowledgeable knowledge workers to move their businesses forward. So I always feel like a politician when I say this phrase, but it really is all about jobs in the economy. I threw in this slide this time around, even though this event happened at the end of 2012, I still find it a big challenge that Arne Duncan laid out for the U.S. to start to eliminate the use of textbooks, both in higher learning as well as K through 12 education. And the analysis or the example that he used in this presentation was that South Korea, which consistently outperforms the U.S., is much further ahead in adopting online learning. And so, the challenge that we face as an economy based on knowledge workers and trying to reacquire manufacturing is to maintain a lead or a leadership position, and education is changing, and changing to online learning, project-based learning, and more and more collaborative types of approaches. So not only is it the most sustainable way to deliver education, it ultimately is the path to the future. And so I think you're going to see in the presentations today how using online learning tools, both physically in the classroom and virtually in e-learning degree programs, is really the way to the future. So to introduce the curriculum today, I'm going to start out by giving a little bit of backstory or context for Sustainable Minds. There are folks on the webcast who are not familiar with Sustainable Minds, I'm guessing, because we don't recognize their names. And then we'll move into the presentations with Professor Beckman from University of Pittsburgh, Wendy Butler from Marylhurst, and Alex Dale from Engineers for a Sustainable World. And I'm Terry Swack, the founder and CEO of Sustainable Minds. Our mission as a company is to operationalize environmental performance in product development and manufacturing to drive revenue and growth through greener product innovation. Now, we believe that you have to put two big ideas together to get that done, and that is to teach people to think differently and then to let them measure. because when you think differently and then you measure, you can actually see if you're creating meaningful improvements and getting truly greener products. It's not enough just to think differently and not measure, because then you don't know if your improvements are meaningful. And it's not enough to measure without thinking differently, because then your improvements are likely to be only incremental. So Sustainable Minds is designed to put together both ideas to allow people to ultimately create truly greener products. And it's in the thinking differently where the innovation happens, not so much in the measurement, but putting the two together enables real innovation. We're pretty excited to be able to report that we are the #1 cloud LCA software for greener product innovation, both in industry and education in over 60 countries. We could not have been prepared for the uptake that we've seen in education, and again across all disciplines, business, design, and every type of engineering, chemical, mechanical, civil, environmental. And Professor Beckman's presentation on today's webcast will be the first view of Sustainable Minds being used in a chemical engineering curriculum. So when we talk about environmental sustainability, what we really talk about is environmental performance. And environmental performance is just the latest criteria in product development that sits alongside functional performance, cost, aesthetics, safety, all of the traditional criteria for which manufacturers have software and metrics for measuring and evaluating to make trade-off decisions. But today they don't have those same access to knowledge and tools to make informed trade-off decisions. And so that is the capability that Sustainable Minds is bringing to bear. We've seen in the last 5 years since we brought a product to market real advances in market drivers, creating real market demand for greener products. And in fact, we believe that environmental performance is an innovation driver that ultimately should lower costs and increase revenues in companies. But for this to happen, companies have to set a goal to make it happen and then acquire the new knowledge, processes, and tools. We teach lifecycle thinking using this eco-strategy framework, which is accessible through many touch points in the software, and again coupled with lifecycle assessment. We make it understandable how each of the inputs into what we call a system bill of materials, because we're merging both engineering and lifecycle science terminology. So it's not just a bill of materials, we call it a system bill of materials. It's all the inputs across all the life cycle stages. Is comprised of chemical data or life cycle inventory data, which when put through the lens of a methodology can attribute all of those chemicals to different types of environmental impacts that also can be attributed to one or more types of damage, either to human health or to the built or natural environment. That is the overview, the simplified overview of how LCA works, and makes it tangible both for professionals and students to understand the building blocks of the tools that they're working with. The way that we've simplified life cycle assessment is by creating a single figure scoring methodology that looks at these 10 impact categories and creates a single figure score. It's weighted and normalized. That we also then break out the global warming score and provide the carbon equivalence so that there are 2 scores per input, the millipoint score and the carbon equivalent score. Critical to simplify how to think differently and measure, because now there are so many people in manufacturing organizations across departments who are involved in making decisions about what products to make and how to make them. And all of their decisions ultimately impact the environmental performance in the design or in the marketing or selling of the product. So having a common understanding and a common language to use throughout the product development process is becoming fairly mission critical. And the foundational concept to really understand is that there is no such thing as a green product. Green is a relative value, so something can only be greener than something else. So the fundamental learning using Sustainable Minds, it's all about creating comparisons. So starting with a benchmark or a reference, analyzing where the impacts are occurring, and generating alternatives to understand where real performance improvement can be gained. So actually, Sustainable Minds is eco-concept modeling software with real-time LCA results. And it's based on these three pillars of software, data, and collaboration, learning, knowledge management, and community. And it's used to benchmark and compare quantified estimates. It's for non-experts. It's a standardized system, and it's easy to share results. We also, just to drill into the learning portion for a moment, have built this extensive learning center, which in and of itself is the equivalent of about a 150-page textbook with a lot of instructional content, case studies, tables, formula that take you through. Here is the user guide that take you through front to back, conducting an LCA, but the other sections in the Learning Center are an extensive section on the methodology, as well as eco-design and the Sustainable Minds backstory. The other piece that enables educators and manufacturers to design and model just what they need is our ability to create custom data and add it to the data set specific to the problem that you're trying to solve. And Professor Beckman is going to talk a little bit about that. The data browser allows you to look and see the contents of the data set and then request as you need additional data for your projects. Just quickly jumping through an example project because I want to get to our first presenter. And just to give you a little bit of background, Professor Beckman stumbled upon us on the internet somewhere and did not know that something like Sustainable Minds that would make it easy for him to integrate environmental sustainability into his course existed. We were thrilled to meet, and after our first meeting, he signed up and went forward. So, Professor Beckman, please go forward now.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Again, I'm Eric Beckman. I'm on the Chemical Engineering faculty at the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm going to chat briefly today about my initial use of Sustainable Minds in my course on product design for chemical engineers. Just briefly about me, I've been teaching here at Pitt since 1989. My research has been focused on green chemistry and green chemical product design for a couple of decades, and so I've been always motivated to try and bring life cycle-based design concepts into my class. About 10 years ago, I created our course here on product design. The course started out as an elective and has turned into a required course since then. As far as University of Pittsburgh, just some salient points to make there is that product design is a required course now at Pitt. Probably the most interesting feature to mention about the department is the explosion in enrollment. It's probably at least doubled over the past 5 years, and it's still increasing. I had almost 80 students in class this spring semester, or for seniors, and we have 135 majors in the sophomore class, so it's still going up. The students are very interested in green design as it relates to their future careers and they're interested because they know that the large companies that they often end up working for have significant efforts in green design. So green design is no longer a nice to have, but it's more of a must have as far as the students are concerned. A little about the course. Chemical Engineering 614 is the course that I introduced Sustainable Minds to. It's a required course. The vast majority of the students that take it are seniors. These are second semester seniors. And my challenge in bringing life cycle concepts into product design has been really the same for the past 5 or 6 years, is I have to teach my students everything there is to know about product design in a single semester. And so I can't devote enormous amounts of time to green design. So perhaps I might be able to allocate 2 weeks to green design concepts. So that's a time constraint. At the same time, I don't want to give the students merely rules of thumb on green design. That's not really sufficiently rigorous for engineering students. So when I literally stumbled across Sustainable Minds and decided to use it for the first time, it appeared that it was a way that I could essentially have my cake and eat it too. I could allot the amount of time that I was able to green design and provide something that would be sufficiently rigorous for a group of fairly motivated chemical engineering seniors. Okay, so the question is first, how did I do this? Again, I started working with the staff at Sustainable Minds very late in the fall semester to get ready for the introduction of the software to the students in the spring. And so when I did introduce it, I started with a lecture on what I call the basics of life cycle design, life cycle impact analysis, which involves some descriptions of what full process LCA was, some of the tools that other people use, the BASF tool, the BEAS tool, and then moved to a discussion of Sustainable Minds in class, where I used the toaster example. What I wanted to do is I just show some pictures of the classroom I teach in, and those are at the bottom of this slide, just to show you that this is an engineering classroom. It's very computer-centric. It seats about 85, and there are 42 machines there. What this allows me to do is I was able to run the students through the use of the software up at the front. At the same time, because this is cloud-based, the students were logged into their accounts and could follow along and do their own thing on the machines. So the combination of the software being cloud-based and the setup of my classroom made it very easy to get up and running in terms of the use of the software. Okay, and now as far as the actual project, again, remember that I've got 2 weeks to go through all of green design with my students, given the constraints of the semester. And so I decided to have them work on something they're very familiar with, and that's also a chemical product, and that was shampoo. So what I did was I provided the students with basically a model formulation for shampoo, which I'm going to show you in a sec, and then essentially challenged the students, who work in groups of 4 typically. These are their usual design groups. And I challenged them to, 1, create the baseline assessment. As Terry mentioned previously, there's no such thing as green, but one thing might be greener than another, so we always start with the baseline assessment. Once we have that, I asked them to explore improvements to the formulation that would greatly reduce the environmental footprint while retaining the efficacy. Okay, again, briefly, for those of you that don't know, this is what's typically in your shampoos. As you can see, it's mostly water. What's important here is when you look at this formulation, some of the components were already in the Sustainable Minds database, but some were not when I was looking at this again last fall. And I worked closely with some of the Sustainable Minds staff to either add new data to the database, so to cover compounds which weren't there originally, or we created workarounds where some of the components we turned into assemblies, essentially, so that they can be included in kind of a workaround manner. But working closely with the staff there, going back and forth, I was all ready to go by the time the semester started, And again, when we looked at the formulation, it involved not just what was in the shampoo, but the packaging, what the bottle was made from. Okay, and when I challenged the students to look at creating a greener design, I had them focus on the manufacturing stage of the life cycle, which included naturally the chemicals themselves, and also processes where they were needed. In particular, the bottle manufacturing played a significant role. We included transport, but that turned out to be only a minor contributor to the overall environmental impact. We didn't really worry about end of life for this particular project, mostly because all of the shampoo ends up in the same place, and that's down the drain, so to speak. Although some of the groups did look at what would happen if one used a recyclable material for the bottle. So there was a little bit of end of use here, but I didn't mandate it. I asked the students to use 1 year's use as their functional unit. Most of them groups assumed about 10 grams per day. And again, most of the groups, when they did the baseline analysis, came up with a product that included about 22 millipoints, which you can see in one of the pictures there. And then the students came up with varying strategies to try and reduce the millipoints through, again, a number of different ideas. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples here now. Okay, this is the strategy of one particular group. They ended up with a 45% reduction. Again, we start with our 22 millipoints. And I noticed a lot of the students did this because of the way the Sustainable Minds results are presented, particularly assigning millipoints to individual components, which the students found terribly useful. For them, it showed them vividly where were the green bottlenecks in the design, some of which they found very surprising because it was sometimes very small components created significant impact. So, for example, one group looked at starting with simple substitutions, in other words, glycerin from vegetable oil instead of glycerin from petrochemicals. And the simple substitutions dropped the number of millipoints substantially. Again, then more what I would call complex substitutions, where they actually had to look at chemicals that could perform similar functions but might have reduced impact. And in this first case here in that box, we're talking about replacing the lead soap with something different. And then finally, and this I find interesting about engineers, is eliminations. Oftentimes my engineering students felt that some of the components that were just there for aesthetics, like the pearlizer, which makes the shampoo look kind of shiny and gives it a certain viscosity, they felt, well, those aren't really necessary, so they eliminated them entirely. I just found that interesting about engineers is they always go for a function over form, and I had to explain that products don't always ask for that. Sometimes aesthetics are very important. Here's another student strategy. They came up with nearly a 60% reduction in millipoints. And again, their first take on this was to try and substitute as many of the petrochemicals with plant-based substitutes. Again, eliminations. And a number of groups felt that having a preservative in shampoo was completely unnecessary. And so a lot of them eliminated the preservatives as an example of making it more sustainable. And then finally, this group looked at redesigning the package, making a more concentrated shampoo using recycled polymer. They ended up with nearly 60% reduction. Okay, my key learnings in use of the software for the first time is I guess I shouldn't have been surprised at this, but my engineering students picked up the software very fast, over a weekend, faster than I did. They were barely through with the toaster example when they were already pros, and I guess I should realize this. They're all 21 and they're engineering students, and boy, they tore right into it. The cloud basis for the software is very convenient in that we could use it in class, and then the groups were able to use it extensively offline out of the class, which was great. Just an interesting side point is, again, my engineering students tended to discount the importance of components if they didn't provide technical functions. In other words, they just provided aesthetics, like pigment in the bottle, the pearlizer in the shampoo. I just found that interesting. For me I guess the key thing was I did get to have my cake and eat it too. I was able to introduce life-cycle-aided design in a meaningful way to my engineering students in the space of 2 weeks. I really enjoyed working with the SM staff, which allowed me to expand the database and add new compounds, which is great. And I realized that because my students pick up the software so fast, the next time I use this, I can stuff more things to do into this unit because I don't have to allow as much time for them to learn how to use the Sustainable Mind software. I overestimated that the first time through. Finally, as far as future trends are concerned, my chemical engineering students, typically at least 90% of them, will go from getting their bachelor's degree right out into working for fairly large companies. All of these companies maintain very active green design programs. For example, companies like Clorox have entirely green product lines. So the companies are interested in having engineers who can speak this language. They're interested in having chemical engineers work for them who at least understand the basics of life cycle analysis and can apply it in product design. So the companies want it, my students are very interested, and the Sustainable Mind software allowed me to do this in a tractable way, which worked for me. Thanks very much.
Well, Eric, thank you very much. A quick question came in during your presentation about the formula being proprietary. That was the question. Was the formula not proprietary?
That's correct. What I did was again, many shampoo formulations are proprietary. And so what I did was I did a little searching online, and I looked at the patent literature to get examples of, say, generic shampoo formulations. And so what you saw was an example of what I would call a generic formulation.
All right, great. Thank you, Eric. That was fantastic. And again, the first example that we've been able to present in a chemical engineering course. So that was fascinating for me as well. In contrast, which I love, I'd like to introduce Wendy Butler, who is an adjunct professor at Marylhurst in the Sustainable MBA program. And Wendy, I can let you just take it away and tell your story.
This is not necessarily technical, nor are most of the students. But by integrating the Sustainable Minds LCA tool in a marketing course, suddenly the class becomes rather real rather than just an abstract course. So a little bit about me. I'm not going to take too much time reading this because I know I'm going to run out of time, a typical marketing instructor. But I've been teaching for over 13 years, as I said. I got involved in sustainability, mostly looking at connections between quality management, and I thought that was a good pairing, and then also by discussing Al Gore's film in a public relations class, and that intrigued me, so I began to explore further. So, well, Marylhurst University in our curriculum, I should probably talk a little bit about that since it is unique. I feel we're trend-setting, and we have non-traditional students, so I'll talk about our program and how we're using the LCA tool. So Marylhurst was founded in 1893, and we're actually Oregon's oldest Catholic university. We're just south of Portland, about 10 miles on a beautiful campus in beautiful Oregon, Pittsburgh, Oregon. There are several unique aspects to our Sustainable MBA that match current trends in adult education. So first, our Sustainable MBA is an accelerated online program. So there was a report that showed 60% of private sector colleges and universities are looking at online programs for their long-term strategy. So we're really proud at Marylhurst to be on the leading edge of that. And a typical student is a distance learner, and they'll complete one course at a time. Each course is 5 weeks long, and my courses typically have about 23 to 25 students per class, sometimes a little less. So in a typical week, the way the course works is that students will log on to the online classroom. They'll log on and comment 4 to 5 days for their participation points. They'll respond to several discussion questions in addition to doing other assignments, of course. And then some people don't think the online program is quite as rich as maybe an in-class program, but just I'll share a quick example. In my course that ended recently, one student downloaded one of our discussion threads into a Word document, and it actually came out at 70 pages. So students can be very, very engaged, and because they have time to analyze, research, and write, their posts and then post them later, they can really support their assertions. So we think it's quite an incredibly rich learning environment. And then second point is that student demographic for our graduate program is different from a traditional college cohort. So our average student age is around 36 to 38. Most of our students work, they're professionals, and nearly all have families. So the online modality gives them the flexibility that they need to be able to get their work done and really learn. In online learning also, practical application becomes really important. So that's why the LCA tool integrated into our curriculum really supported the program, is that students get access at any time, any place, work with the tool, and then come on later into their classroom for exploration. So then another distinction for our program is that students work individually and in teams, so they're collaborating from all over the world. I've had students in Mexico and New Zealand and Eastern Africa, Northern Africa, everywhere around, wherever they can access the internet, they're able to learn. So there's a lot of advantages for virtual teaching. So next I'll explain where the students use the sustainable marketing in my SUS 520 course. Okay, so three ways they use the way that we've integrated sustainable minds into the curriculum. The first one is through exploration. So Eric's students are very technical, and so as he said, they just jumped right in and were able to explore the tool. But due to the 5-week constriction and also the fact that many of my students are not technical students and they're working in teams, I typically email them a week in advance, and they work with Sustainable Minds to get their logins, and usually one team member will establish a team login, and so then they'll all go in together. They can explore the tool, look at the theory, and get it into their heads and just familiar with it a week before the course begins. They're then asked to explore the amazing Sustainable Minds library, and I have to say it's really excellent, particularly for marketing students and particularly for students that may not have a strong sustainability background. As Terry said, there's extensive material in the library. One of the ones my students find really helpful is the eco-design strategies in particular. So this helps them get started quickly and easily while they're forming their marketing plan project ideas. So that's sort of the exploration stage. Then there is a discussion stage. So in online, we always have discussion questions, 2 per week. And so for the DQ, which is shown up here on the slides, the topic is the product life cycle. And so this discussion area helps them to share, and I'll show some slides later, their experiences with the tool, and to be able to just sort of digest it and share what they've learned. So the task that really teaches our students finally the practical application of sustainable marketing theory is for their marketing plan projects, and that's that third area that we've integrated the Sustainable Minds tool. There are several areas where I ask them to use the inputs from the tool, and the first is when they do their product ideation. So the teams are completing 5 phases of a marketing plan over 5 weeks, and so the first thing they'll do is collaborate to find a product and create the reference. So they have to find a durable consumer goods product, and it helps if they have a reference product, and especially a small thing like a stapler or something that they can try to create a green product for, so then they can take apart the reference product and sort of have that as a starting point. So once they've settled on a product and tested the impacts, they can complete their product description, part of the plan, their strategy, their goals and objectives. And so that's phase 1. That's due at the end of the first week. And so then the next input typically comes in the marketing mix section. That's week 4. And so using Sustainable Minds, our students, they can dig deeper into justifying the product design. Suppliers suddenly becomes all clear to them. There's suppliers and supply chain if they're not working in that aspect of their industry. They look at packaging, and Sustainable Minds does packaging as well, and then also transportation and all the impacts that result from that. As part of their marketing mix, they'll also do a life cycle analysis, and contrasting the traditional product life cycle with the PLC, as you saw with the discussion questions. So this is where we solidify all of that theory. I also asked them to capture the screenshots of the data that they need to interpret, report, and use in their marketing plans. And some plans, they'll just go ahead and discuss it or put it in a chart of their own making, but most often I'll see the integration of the Sustainable Minds output right in their marketing plan. So the LCA also helps students justify how their greener product can be differentiated and positioned in a competitive market. Those are important marketing concepts to learn. And I asked them to visit the Learning Center. Again, that eco-design strategy section is really great for that. So having detailed eco-design data really helps them in developing their product tactics for the marketing mix, as well as awareness of the product design and the distribution. And then also later on when they do start looking at costs, it becomes very helpful for that. So that's one of the projects. I'm going to talk about this one, I think, just for time. Say the first one, I'll just briefly say this was a Jane Goodall edition of a Mont Blanc pen. And so the interesting concept here was they were trying to justify how do luxury brands retain positioning and perception if the material costs are lower or recycled. So there was a great discussion that went on about that. This second one, a marketing plan, was they produced a They produced a smart power strip, and they were concerned about credibility and greenwashing. Here it is. And they wanted to use the LCA for this product, for product design, and then choice of materials, packaging, and transportation. And that was to ensure transparency and that their activities matched their goals and objectives. They were really concerned about transparency in this team. Just some other interesting projects so far. I've had one team was really interested in hiking and outdoors activities, so they decided to design a high-altitude climbers tent. And this caused quite a bit of discussion in the boards on week 5 when we allow students to look at each other's plans and they have discussions over what's going to work and what's not going to work. And the choice of tent stake material was silver fir, which is one of the Sustainable Minds materials choices, rather than a recycled metal or metal product. And so the discussion revolved around the cost, price, durability, perception. For example, when the tent fly off the side of Mount Everest in an 80-mile-an-hour wind. And the team really stuck to their guns with the silver fir, because just using the tool and with the options of materials, they felt that they had researched the material enough and felt that it had quite the correct tensile strength and also met their goal to be near carbon neutral. So that was actually one of the interesting plans that students submitted. So even though students might not really grasp the technical terms, by 2 or 3 weeks out, they're really starting to grasp the bill of materials, what types of products and sizes and measurements go into products, and it can be really eye-opening for non-technical students. So here's some student reflections. I'm going to go back to my second point after the setup and then the DQ discussion.
Hey,
students,
Wendy,
yes.
I'm just going to jump in from a time perspective
Mm-hmm.
and let people know that we will send them this deck if they request it, because these quotes that Wendy pulled out were extremely interesting and valuable, and we spent a bunch of time talking about them. But I'm going to ask you to wrap up with the key learnings.
Oh, sure. As a marketing instructor, we can go on and on. I have no problems keeping my students in my on-ground classes for 4 hours in the classroom, trust me. So key learnings. Product design and development is more extensive than realized. And as I said, students really jump into the tool, and then suddenly this whole world of product design and development opens up for them, and they're actually quite surprised. So non-technical students in a marketing class really can grasp the basics of the tool and jump in and start using it in a practical way. Also, LCA increases differentiation and supports the transparency. Those are things students are really interested in our program. But also, many of them are really interested in social justice issues. And this causes a discussion because the Sustainable Minds, of course, doesn't really take into consideration that element. So that is a good discussion starter for them. Just some trends. I think students need to come out of college with practical, applicable tools that they can use. And so we encourage them to put this tool on their resume so that they've had some exploration with something that's real, that's a metric that's out there, and it's a real great addition to their sustainability education. So thanks for allowing me to share my experiences with you today, and as I said, sorry I took so much time, but thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. I think your enthusiasm, both yours and the students, comes through and makes it just really exciting. And we're going to move right into Alex's presentation. He's got some great stories to share as well. So, Alex, go ahead.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me. My name is Alexander Dale. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called Engineers for a Sustainable World. And we do a bunch of different things. I'll talk about that in a second. So let me get this. So a little bit about me. I am, if we're going with LinkedIn labels, a non-traditional STEM graduate. I recently finished up my PhD in civil and environmental from Pitt. My background is in energy and water policy, but all of our research methods from our research group focus on LCA. So I have a very good background in the expert level side of LCA. Simultaneously with doing my PhD, I've been involved with Engineers for a Sustainable World at the national level, helping to drive some of the strategic planning and some of the educational efforts. And as my first postgraduate position then, I've stepped into the executive director role. The organization's been around since about 2002, and we're driving it in a new direction, which is really nice. And it helps me fulfill kind of the social obligations that I see as engineers. And as to why sustainability, I see sustainability as a gigantic, complex, and very discussable issue, and that just fascinates me. So ESW is a national organization, international organization. We have 34 chapters at different universities and a bunch of growing professional chapters. We've been around since 2002. The focus of these chapters is on technical sustainability projects, whether that's on campus, whether that's in local communities, and some of that is with international work. That's how do we make these places better, how do we give students a chance to do some service learning, do some design, implement something. And then nationally, we work on connecting those chapters into a national community and also doing some education. And the last few years, we've really been expanding those educational efforts. To get beyond the sets of projects, we've expanded to some webinar offerings to include some skills-focused webinars. And some of that has been leadership skills, how to do project management. But also we want to do some sustainable design skills so that ESW alums are more prepared for the workforce. They've been exposed to tools that they're going to use, even if they don't have classes on them. We're aiming to expose students to ideas, regardless of their school, and not necessarily to replace courses just yet. But webinars have a limited depth. So we met Sustainable Minds at a conference last year. We realized that it would be a really great partnership opportunity to use Sustainable Minds to offer a deeper life cycle assessment experience to our chapters and members. And what we came up with is the LCA+U challenge. And this goes to the idea that there are a lot of contests and opportunities out there for students to suggest improvements to their campuses. But very rarely do those improvements have any sense of, is this actually better attached to them? So we requested proposals from our chapters. We said, okay, find some system, some service, some project that you're working on around campus. Tell us about it. Tell us how you could use LCA to make it better. Show us that you have contact with campus staff. We want this to be something that can be real. We'll give you access to the software, and we'll look for some final presentations. We'll provide some mentoring along the way. Students were doing this as an extracurricular project, so our timeline is maybe a little bit longer than the other two presentations here. But they were doing it outside of class. This is a bonus activity, and timing-wise, they could have used even a little bit more time. So first year overview, we've just finished the first round. We had signed up to 34 chapters. We got 6 projects that got to fruition from 3 different major categories, 2 looking at specific material options, 1 on wipes for gymnasia and 1 on takeout containers, which I'll talk a little bit more about. 2 looking at buildings on campus that are going to be renovated. How do we make those buildings more energy efficient, lower impact? and 2, looking at existing design projects within the chapter and which materials do we pick. So students were provided with access to the software as well as some mentoring support from ESW as well as some time from Sustainable Minds. As I mentioned, some of us on the ESW national team have some solid experience with life cycle assessment as well, so we can provide some of that mentoring support. These are the 5 schools that we got proposals from and we're working with. So I want to talk about 2 projects in particular. One from Ohio State, which looks at energy and water consumption for this gigantic engineering laboratory building. And this was an example of meshing some of the on-campus service learning and LCA as well as working with the facilities department. And then one from RIT, which looked at takeout containers, which is what material do we use, what system do we use for takeout containers. And that's a little bit more of a classic LCA problem. Both of these have produced some really nice results and should have some nice impacts on campus as well. So Ohio State started out with this very large building, and they said, okay, it consumes a lot of energy and a lot of water. It's an older building. How do we make that better? And we talked with them a lot, and this ended up being a learning opportunity to talk about scoping, but there just wasn't a good scope for them to talk about the whole building at once. And so they ended up looking at just water usage, that they're pumping a lot of water around the building, so if they could decrease that, that would save a bunch of energy. And then they have a large roof, so if we can capture water off that roof and use it instead, that will also save some energy. And they ended up with a very specific project looking at different types of piping, different types of tank materials, different sizes of tanks. And they have a best option, and they've been working with their facilities department now to find some grant money to build a pilot project to implement the system and see how well it'll work. And some key learnings here that focusing on a piece of the problem is key, and that even though this was indirect energy savings, they're still looking at about $100,000 a year in lower energy costs. The other team is from RIT, and they have 17 different dining areas on campus. And so but all of them use different takeout containers. That ranges from tinfoil over a plate to biomaterials to standard plastic containers. And this dining service is interested in standardizing that, and the team said, okay, so let's look at these materials, figure out how we use them, figure out a better option. They surveyed some of the existing materials around campus, and they also identified a new option that would be a collected and reused container. There's a picture of the team there. The results, and shown here on the right, is some of the bill of materials for the newer PLA-lined gas clamshell that they invented. They were looking at, how do we standardize this? They did look at all the different phases, including a bunch of end-of-life material. They figured out that about 2/3 of them are landfilled, but the rest can be composted or recycled, and are. The results show that the reusable option was the lowest impact, and that unlike some of Eric's results, the transportation was actually surprisingly important for a lot of materials. Dining Services is now reviewing a lot of these results with an eye to making some informed decisions. The team would like me to note that these results are not necessarily applicable to a lot of different campuses without some extra work. ESW National, we're going to work on helping to translate those results to other places. This is a question that we see at a lot of campuses. And some key learnings here that different products can have very different hotspots, but that even with uncertainty, there can sometimes be a clear winner, which is a little bit rare in LCA. But they did an example looking at the reusable and recycled material, where even with a large amount of energy used for washing it, it was still better than the other options that they had available. So key learnings here that for students that learned that system definition is really critical to good or any results, that life cycle assessment, this is a deeper exposure to it. It can be a really useful piece of a broader project or analysis, particularly once you have a good definition and a good idea of what you're trying to look at. And finally, that some projects don't make sense from an environmental impacts perspective. We had a team looking at putting solar panels on a school bus stop that was already part of the grid, and it just didn't make sense in terms of putting the new panels in, putting in new materials. From an educator's point of view, and from our point of view as a nonprofit, Sustainable Minds was a really good tool for in-depth exploration of what we consider to be a really key design skill. The cloud-based approach fits really well with our network of chapters. It's easy to get other people on, even if they're across the country. And with some tuning on dates and example, we really look forward to repeating this challenge with Sustainable Minds. And maybe if there are educators out there, maybe some of your students would join us as ESW members. Finally, I want to close with a trend slide here. That the future is in networks, and that sounds a little bit cliche, but there's some deeper meaning there. First, that Sustainable Minds is network-based software. It allows a lot more people to work with LCA data. You can use it anywhere, as Eric pointed out, and Wendy showed with online pieces. And then pairing that, ESW is a network of sustainability-minded individuals. We have a lot of technical folks. And then using programs like LCA+U, we can provide guidance on real applications of LCA regardless of where students are in different programs, different years. And I'd like to note that pairing these networks, which are external to academia, and then supporting both of them, pairing those with traditional educational institutions or non-traditional ones can allow a lot more people, not just those at some of the best schools that are very interested in pursuing these, to learn some of this life cycle thinking and be better designers for a better world. And that's our interest, is let's make better people regardless of where they go to school, regardless of some of their background. So with that, I will close, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Alex, and everyone else on the webcast. I had myself muted, but now I'm back. Now would be the time for you guys to send in your questions. We'll have a few minutes to respond to those. If it goes a little long, for those of you who want to stay for your questions to be answered, we can go a little bit longer. If you'd like the presentation deck from today, as you exit the webcast, there are a few questions you can respond to. One is open-ended, and you can add your request for the deck there. Also wanted to let you know that over time we have been collecting example courses as well as classes from faculty teaching with Sustainable Minds. We have the class projects from today's presentations, if those are of interest to you. All of the faculty have contributed their curriculum, their course outlines in the spirit of sharing, so they're free. We just pass them on to you as you need them. So just to kind of circle back, we had a good discussion. Eric, Alex, and Wendy the other day, and I think it's interesting for educators to see how other people are dealing with similar types of materials, and particularly that Wendy's work, and it is so different from the engineering courses that we just saw. I thought it would be interesting to go back and have Eric and or Alex share some of their observations or contrasting observations with some of the things that that Wendy's students experienced, or Wendy, for you also to kind of compare and contrast how marketing students are engaging with using LCA in contrast with engineering students.
Hi, this is Eric. I'm looking at the slide on student reflections from DQ, and sort of dead center near the bottom is a quote on Sustainable Minds LCA is really an engineering tool. I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but I agree with the rest of the quote. It definitely appealed to the engineers in my class, and I don't know if they spent days trying this material or that, but they did treat it as a challenge, as to how to drive down the environmental footprint of the product, and they took to it very quickly. The setting up of the SBM, the bill of materials, the system bill of materials, seemed intuitive to them, and so I have to admit I completely agree with most of that quote, and that my engineering students really took to it quickly, and it seemed fairly obvious to them, and they almost treated it, sort of like a contest or a game. How low can we go?
I think it's always a challenge as an educator to answer to the different learning styles of our students. And this is just such a great option for those technical students that in a marketing class, you get a lot of the visually oriented students, the ones that jump in and like to do the advertising samples and that kind of thing. But this tool is just so great to allow those engineering design oriented students to share their expertise with other students.
Wendy, you got a request from one of the attendees who has a company in Oregon whether your students would like to take on a real-life project. So I'll pass that connection on to you.
Wow, that could be a great challenge. I might have to have the whole class participate as one big team to do that. We're always sort of looking for realistic projects for the students to do, and of course we'd have to define the scope just because a 5-week flies by really quickly, but yeah, I'd love to get that contact.
Sure. Well, we are at the top of the hour, and for those of you whose questions we didn't take now, we will follow up with you. Just to wrap up, we will you can go to the website and sign up for a free 15-day trial account. Educators and students can purchase online. We also have quantity discount programs, and you'll note upon registration we pose the question to you, which type of subscription program would be appropriate for your school, whether it's for a class or a couple of classes, or integrating across a whole department's curriculum, or even across a school or a site. And we really are very intent on getting Sustainable Minds in front of every student in every discipline to produce people, to create greener knowledge workers for the greener product marketplace, so that we really can change the course of events, both to keep our economy going in the right direction and also to keep our planet going in the right direction. We have recorded this webcast, and within a few days we'll post the replay as well as with a write-up of the content of this webcast. You can go to our website, to the blog, and click on the SM in Education link and read the write-ups as well as listen to the replays of all 4 of the previous webcasts. Each is unique with the mix of presenters and schools and curriculum. And once again, I'd like to thank today's participants for inspiring us and sharing your experiences. And I leave it to all of you to reach out to us. Hopefully we've inspired some of you to start to integrate Sustainable Minds into your curriculum, and we look forward to helping you do just that. So have a great day, and we look forward to connecting.